Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Hier lernst du alles rund um das Thema Investor Relations, Fundraising und Kapitalmarkt. Mein Name ist Julia Stötzl und ich bin Gründerin und CEO von Investor Relations Beratung Unicorn. Unicorn ist auf einer Mission, Investor Relations für die nächste Generation einzuführen. Das bedeutet ganz konkret die Integration von digitalen Medien wie zum Beispiel LinkedIn, Podcast, Newsletter in die klassische Kapitalmarktarbeit. Mehr Informationen zu Unicorn, aber auch zum Podcast findest du unter unicornconsulting.com. Und jetzt wünsche ich euch viel Spaß beim Zuhören.
So our planet cannot correct the impact we create as humans on our planet, and biodiversity loss and climate change are the biggest ticket. And then the question was, is that connected to agriculture? And the obvious answer is yes. We were going with this analysis into 200 meetings externally and internally. And I think this is something which is always needed if you work in that space of sustainability, that you constantly recalibrate your assessments, that you constantly ask others, do you agree and subscribe to the measures we take?
Hello everyone, my name is Julia and I'm founder and CEO of investor and public relations consultancy Unicorn. Unicorn is on a mission to provide next generation investor and public relations by utilizing digital media into the IR work.
And my name is Caroline and I'm leading investor relations and ESG at a German neobank. And in today's episode, we will deep dive with Christian Roll, co-host and moderator at Engel TV. Let's get started.
So Caroline, we met each other actually last week already in person, but how about you give me an update on your latest ESG matters and what's driving you around at the moment? Keeping you awake at night, so to say.
You never get bored of the topic, do you? So this week, super exciting, I mean, at least for me, we finalized the first materiality assessment. And we actually did it with this double materiality version, which will be the new required one under European directive. So we actually had to look at the financial impact and the impact materiality of the different topics. And honestly, it was really interesting, both like to get people talking about the topics. And I mean, some topics were closer to the job of different stakeholders than to others, but they had to exchange and find a meeting point and kind of like frame the topics also and the implications that it will have for the company at a later date. So very exciting and really happy to have seen the results.
Wow, big milestone. Really cool.
Yeah, they went a bit in the direction I was expecting, but with a few surprises.
Okay. Can you talk about the surprises or not really?
Soon. Okay. Yeah, they will be published in the annual report, so you will be seeing them officially at some point.
All right, okay. We'll link it in the show notes once it's public.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, other things that have been going on, like always related to this new regulation, it's called the CSRD. We actually have to like look into it. Like you have a document of like almost 300 pages. You have to really understand what you will have to report on. So now we're really deep diving into this and understanding the implications for the company and our reporting standards, which is rather tedious, but I mean, very satisfying to get done with and seeing what they really expect from you. So that's also
really cool. So a lot of ESG matters on your agenda at the moment.
Literally. I mean, on the IR side, there's always stuff going on. I mean, IR never sleeps, but I think on the news side, there was one which I found super interesting. I mean, we knew it was coming more or less. It was kind of pre-announced in a way how Getir was looking to raise funds, but the valuation that came out of it being, I mean, less than half than what it was before at 2.5 billion. I mean, it speaks a bit for the markets, but at the same time that they could raise also speaks well, let's say.
Yeah, I think there's just too much money already in there. I think, you know, the alternative would have been, I guess, that they don't get money and it's a very heavily loss-making business. So I think the alternative would have been probably the company would have not existed anymore. So I think investors rather taking the cut, I guess. It's a bit bitter though. I mean, and I think it speaks that the industry is suffering a lot, this whole food delivery industry. But it's also bitter. I remember like Gorillas got sold to Getir, right? And I think it was like almost an all stock trade. So yeah, I mean, let's see. But I think in general, it's a tough business at the moment for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, Julia, what's up with you? You have also some exciting news for us?
Yes, so much happening. I actually almost had to think to boil it down to 2 or 3 things because so many things are happening. So what I can talk about that it's official. Oh my God, I cannot believe this. I signed an office lease. This is my first commercial office lease I have signed. Yay! It's gonna be an office space in Kreuzberg, and it's a really cool place. Like it's insane. I wanted to have it forever, and it will have a podcast studio, a recording studio, so I can also, invite clients. We can do our Street Reads podcast there. We can do Street Reads events there. And I will have just an office space to invite clients over to have because I have a team now, right? So team members we can sit together and do team offsites or whatever and meet in person. So I think this will be an important step for my next growth rocket I'm trying to launch. So it's so exciting. Like building Unicorn is just super exciting, and I don't know. I learned so much, and I hired now also like a senior consultant that will help me with client work. So that also gives me personally more leverage to work on the company itself, which I'm most excited about, I have to say. And otherwise, I am on multiple conferences next week. So next week means the week starting 18th of September. I'm at the BADA conference. I'm at the Berenberg Goldman conference. And I'm at Bits and Pretzels. So this is going to be super, super exhausting. But also looking forward, it's going to be almost like a reunion, meeting everyone from the whole capital market scene. And the Berenberg Goldman conference I've been to already 5 years ago or so, and I have it in fond memories and glad to go back again. It's in combination with Oktoberfest. So I'm going to be around Oktoberfest a couple of times the next 2 weeks. So. Not so
We
good
know
for
where to
my
find
health.
you.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to find me at Oktoberfest. So that's pretty much it. And there's one announcement also to make on behalf of both of us. It's now Street Reads is going to be present with a podcast booth at the German Eigenkapital Forum. So in case you are curious to get on the show, this is your chance. Reach out, or I will be around on the floor and scouting for interesting companies anyways. And if you want to come on, we're going to be in the media launch, doing some podcast interviews that we're going to pre-record for the show.
Can't wait. This is going to be exciting.
It is.
Hello and welcome to Street Tweets. Our episode today is focused on ESG, and we're very lucky to have with us Klares, who's leading ESG strategy at Bayer, and he will be able to give us insights about his career, his point of view on stability topics that are touching both his field in particular, but also in general how many companies are approaching these topics. So now thank you again for joining us today, and I'd give you the first word with the first question. I don't know if there's a few things that you want to add before we start the
Nothing
questions.
to add instead of just saying thank you for having me today.
Amazing.
Our pleasure.
We're
very lucky to have you with us, such a seasoned guest. So maybe we'll dive in with the first question. In fact, could you share with our audience a bit more how your career, and we already heard a bit before we started the interview, what your background is, so super exciting, how your career led you to leading Bayer sustainability strategy?
Very happy to do that. I'm sometimes still teaching in the university, and students are afraid of going into big corporations because big corporations are so kind of, everything looks so rigid from the outside world, so streamlined. But actually, big corporations have a number of advantages, and my career path is like a nice example that you can enter a corporation like Bayer as a scientist. So I have a PhD in chemistry. I also have a master in economics, but I came in as a chemist into Bayer. I loved working, trying to find in the life science area new active ingredients in crop protection. But then companies give you the opportunity to leave that space. And I had the chance to be a project manager. I saw the world. I saw completely new areas of work. Actually, I didn't see anymore what I did before, but I had to deal with marketing, business, and with country organizations, regional organizations, regulatory frameworks, all these type of things which I had no clue about before. So that was the first adventure. Then I turned to be a team lead for regulatory affairs for insecticides. another cool experience. You have a team, you are leading very experienced people. And then I think on the journey to where we are today, or where I am today, it was super important because I started to realize that the outside world has sometimes very different perspectives on you as a company than the world inside of the company. And these worlds are sometimes very close, very big, but very close. So you only talk to your peers in the company or maybe in the industry. But then the rest of the world, particularly on insecticides, had a different perspective on pollinators and how insecticides are dangerous to pollinators. And I realized that sometimes we miss the connection, we lose the connection. And we did an initiative in Bayer where we were the first ones in the industry to make all data on safety of pesticides transparent and accessible to the rest of the world. In pharmaceuticals, that's business as usual today for clinical trials, but in the area of agronomy and pesticides, we were the first company. And it was really because we understood that we cannot always reference in public debates on data which is not accessible, while other people have quote other types of data with different results. So it was very important for me to learn that as a company, which is in public view and under public scrutiny and under public observation, you need to pay attention to this a lot, and you need to stay in contact. And I think that was the moment when I kind of qualified to take over the role of lead of sustainability right after the acquisition of Monsanto. For the combined agricultural departments. And we really decided to come up with a completely new way of thinking sustainability and really embedding it into business, which is today, I think, what more companies do. But 10 years ago, sustainability was seen as a buzzword, which you use to do the nice things after the business is done. And it was not seen as something which has to be part of the business. But if you don't make it part of the business, you will never reach scale of impact. So in a company which wants to become an impact generator, we really thought about what are the big tickets in agriculture we need to address. And we maybe come later to this topic back. But from there, I think trying to get even more impact in that change process, in that transformation process, I had the opportunity to move over out of the division into the corporate function of ESG strategy, because I think we need to get the investors behind that agenda, because in the end of the day, investors decide where the companies go. They determine the agenda to a large extent, and I wanted to collaborate and work with investors. So I had to learn another new language, many new languages I had to learn now, another set of abbreviations from the finance world, and I'm still learning every day.
Super interesting and very extremely relevant. And it's a great experience to have, I'd say. It's a nice progression. Like, you've seen so many point of views, and it connects rather well to probably the next question, which was exactly related to this embedding of ESG within a company strategy and an investor relations program. And as you said, like, the drive from the investor side, we're wondering how do you see this develop, like in a forward-looking manner? Do you see this getting to a value creation point of view, or where do you see this going?
Yeah, I think at this point of time, there are all kinds of approaches, both on the investee and the investor side. But I have my preferred way of looking at sustainability and ESG. And I think every company which wants to go into that space should start with the business. And not with regulations and not with demands. Everybody should, it's basically kind of the materiality analysis that you have to do, but because you want to do it, not because you want to meet requirements, and you really want to figure out where is my impact. And for a company like Bayer, it was very clear, being the biggest impact input provider in agriculture, our impact is on food security, biodiversity loss, and climate change, in the good and the bad sense. So if you want to create impact at scale, we need to come up with solutions addressing food security on the one hand, and biodiversity loss and climate change on the other hand. And we need to make commitments which are significant and outcome driven. So I think, and we need to embed this in business, and we need to find an angle to this where this creates value. And that's step number one in building that strategy, I think, for any company. And step number two is then turning it into an ESG framework. And if you go to the US and you say ESG, you will look into faces not very amused, mostly in Washington. So the term is a bit toxified in the US. In Europe, it's not. But for me, ESG means nothing else but turning or translating your strategy into an investable framework, which should be good anywhere. You make you basically you turn your strategy into something that people can trust, which is exactly what you want, because you want investors to follow your thinking. And then I think what you need to build is a governance, but not a governance which is again centered around regulatory requirements. It's a governance which makes your strategy trustable. And one example is you go out and you share your commitments with a group of investors or other stakeholders. The number one question, even if you have very impressive commitments, number one question is, we don't trust you. Do you really do this? Then you can say, well, look into our report. We report under assurance that we progress. The second question is the achieving of these targets linked to the remuneration of your board, yes or no? And it's almost offending, but it's coming again and again. The question is like, you don't trust me if I say that? No, we don't trust you unless you can show us that the remuneration of your board is connected. So it's very important and that's part of the governance you need to build. You need to make things transparent. You need to report under assurance. You need to embed it into the processes of your company. You need basically to institutionalize sustainability. That's for me ESG. And one part of is the remuneration system has to be connected to achieving these goals. And then, honestly speaking, you are almost there. You create value. You win the trust of investors. But there may be still one hurdle, especially if you're working in a company under public observation like Bayer. If there are controversial topics out there, which are still in the way, you can do whatever you want on all these topics beforehand. If you do not clean up your controversial topics, still you are not investable. So you need to work on the red flags of your ESG ratings on these controversial topics, and you need to really make progress on these ones. And if you are, I think, successful on this last area too, then I think you have an integrated ESG strategy.
Super interesting. It's really about like putting your money where your mouth is, right?
Yes.
Like not just the C-level, like saying, yeah, we're going to do it, but really like if their payment is on the line, then investors will really believe it. So very good point indeed. So when we were talking to some other peers, we heard that, or there was an interesting opinion that was given, that a company has less impactful footprint is in a better position to do good for its stakeholders. Are we already reaching this stage? So would you say that if a company has less impactful footprint, then it's better for the stakeholders? Would you go as far as that? And are investors already holding companies accountable to this level, or is that a bit over the top?
I think the opposite. I think if a company has a very impactful footprint, it has the biggest potential to create impact. And also the biggest potential for potential transformation. So if the impact is very negative, there must be investors coming into this company asking and requesting progress and transformation. Otherwise, they leave the field to those investors who don't care, and then this company with a very big negative footprint will not change. So I think these companies which are basically required to transform need to get the power from the finance sector behind the transformation process. So of course, in the end of the day, there must be potential to transform into something positive. But if I look at agriculture, there's a huge potential and there's a huge need to move into a more sustainable agriculture, which from my angle is to create a food system which neither lacks food security or food production, nor does it starve our planet. So that's the big question. How can you feed this hungry planet without starving it? And obviously, there's a lot of trade-offs to be discussed. And we want the financial sector and the decision makers from the finance sector to participate in this discussion and not to wait and see. I can give you an example, if you like, about a trade-off. It's an example I really like. In Asia, you have the very traditional growing of rice is paddy rice. And everybody knows the pictures. Farmers are walking bare feet to the water and harvesting the rice plants. There's something very positive about this way of producing rice, is that the water suppresses weeds. So you don't need weed control, because only rice can grow in paddy rice. No other plants can grow. It's a very effective way of controlling weeds. You don't need to apply herbicides. Very nice. But there's not enough water. In many areas, there's just water scarcity and you do not have enough water supply. So there's a water issue. And there's a second problem, that paddy rice is like a methane factory. It's a greenhouse gas factory, because under these conditions in the water, tremendous amounts of greenhouse gases formed. So it would be, from a water consumption and from a greenhouse gas climate perspective, really preferable to move out of paddy rice into dry seeded rice. You would really reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a very significant level, and you would reduce water consumption, which is also needed. You would need to do some kind of weed control. And you can say, haha, Bayer, you want to sell more herbicides from an ecosystem balance. I put it on the negative side here and say, yes, that's not the positive, that's the negative in this trade-off, that you would need to do additional weed control. So what's the answer to this? Is it good or bad to move out of paddy rice into dry seeded rice? I think in the end of the day, it's a must, because the greenhouse gas emissions and the water overuse weighed so heavy that we need to find ways to go into this transformation. But I think it's equally important to address the trade-offs and to be very honest about the fact that you would need to do additional weed control, because otherwise you end up in this classical situation where everybody is only pointing fingers on the others and only talks about the downsides. And this is, I think, where the industry should take a role of a positive, transparent lead in the future, more than we did in the past.
You started a bit, if I understood well, your starting point was the materiality assessment to understand what was the most significant topics. How did that go for you? Like to identify, was it hard for you? Like you have such a huge scope and you have so many, like your reach in terms of stakeholders is very broad. Like, and then, I mean, even after having achieved that, how did you go about and then identifying what were the best initiatives in the different categories, your targets, and your plans to achieve them? I know that for you, it was like probably a huge project, but it would be interesting also for our listeners who might be having the same process going on a smaller scale, how they should approach this.
I mean, today, with the CSRD, we have a framework how to conduct this analysis, which is very intense, and we will follow this, and we will conduct all the interviews, and we will go into the details of the details to figure it out along this way. 5 years ago, when we started after the acquisition of Monsanto, how to look into our impact areas, we didn't follow that approach. Actually, we were looking into all kinds of approaches. Can we use the SDGs? Is that a good guidance to see where our impact is? And it was a good guidance, but it was not good enough of a guidance. I saw companies who were ticking off all the SDGs, like we tick them all, and we have an impact everywhere. That was not specific enough. The model we used, and it's only one example, but for agriculture, I think it was very good, is the model of the planetary boundaries, which was developed by Johan Rockström. At least for the environmental piece, which gives a very clear indication which parameters of the environmental development are out of span control of our planet anymore. So our planet cannot correct the impact we create as humans on our planet, and biodiversity loss and climate change are the biggest tickets where, our planet can't handle it anymore. And then the question was, is that connected to agriculture, climate change and biodiversity loss? And the obvious answer is yes. It's obvious. Without further ado and analysis, that was clear. And then the next question is, are we connected? And the answer is also yes. So at the end of the day, we were using this because it was so obvious. That we make a contribution to food security is also clear. But then what we did was, we didn't have just 1 or 2 workshops. We were going with this analysis into 200 meetings externally and internally. We were checking it to so many people from different stakeholder groups. And I think this is something which is always needed if you work in that space of sustainability, that you constantly recalibrate your assessments, that you constantly ask others, do you agree to what we have analyzed as the impact area, but also do you agree and subscribe to the measures we take? Because from this analysis to say biodiversity loss and climate change on the one hand, food security on the other hand, we made 3 commitments. And the first commitment to address food security, and the narrative of our industry was always, we are feeding the world, very confident we are feeding the world. But our major businesses are in the Americas, and our major business are in soy and corn, and is almost more feed than food. So to have a credible talking line on food security, we made the decision to shift significant investments into smallholder farming in low and middle income countries, which is where food is most needed. And that was a business decision. That's not a little project. That was a business decision to shift investments into those spaces where investment is needed. And even more difficult on the space of biodiversity loss and climate change. What can a company commit? Which is powerful and significant. And we made the commitment to reduce, on the one hand, greenhouse gas emissions on the fields of our customers by 30% in 10 years. And also be committed to reduce the environmental impact of we always say crop protection and others say pesticides, but it's the same thing. So to reduce the environmental impact of pesticides by 30% of our pesticides. And believe it or not, before this, our whole industry did not acknowledge that pesticides have an environmental impact. We always said things like our products are safe to the environment if used according to label instructions. But I think our products don't create irreversible harm if used according to label instructions. That's correct. But of course, they have an impact on the environment. Like every medicine has effects and side effects, pesticides have effects and side effects. And we committed to reduce the side effects by 30% in 10 years. And then we went out and asked, is that significant? Is that what you expect, or is it enough, or is it not enough? And I think that is very much necessary, that you create these type of commitments based on your impact analysis, and that you then start to calibrate internally and externally. Is that what people want? Is that what employees support? Is that what the business can take? And I think after many, many conversations, you come to a point where you feel like good with this. And we did. Of course, honestly, if you go to France and you say we want to reduce pesticide impact 30%, they say, oh, it should be 95%. But if you go to other countries, they don't even see that as an issue. Their focus is much more on the social dimension of sustainability. They are much more on the smallholder side. If you go to other countries in the US, they have a much higher focus on the profitability dimension of sustainability, which we typically forget in Europe. But it's also, you cannot do any of this if you cannot come up with a business model for farmers which is profitable.
Important point that you're making here, that actually you're building the ESG strategy, not just, in your chamber within the company, isolated, siloed, but you're really engaging with the stakeholders, constantly getting feedback, and almost like building, I'm building a business, so this is really how it feels, right? You're constantly talking to your customers, you're constantly talking to your stakeholders, trying to figure out, is this what you want, and then calibrate alongside. So I think that's very interesting, and I've never heard it in that way that someone said it. So that was super interesting. As our audience is consisting of a lot of founders, but also IR managers, obviously, maybe you can give some tangible examples how they can really bridge the gap between doing good and creating value. Maybe you have a few more practical tips for us.
On the one hand, I mentioned smallholder farmers. This is not a charity project. This is creating a new customer area, which it's shifting. Maybe at a little bit at the cost of short-term margin towards long-term business developments, but definitely with a business plan behind. You always need a business plan behind, otherwise it's not sustainable. A really cracking moment was when we were discussing with our own people, how can we achieve 30% greenhouse gas emission reduction on the fields of our customers. And the word reduction is always ringing more like an alarm bell. If you talk to the salespeople, like they always hear reduction, reduction sounds not positive. But then there was a moment of truth when we were thinking, look, I mean, also we have made a commitment, I haven't mentioned it before, that Bayer wants to become carbon neutral following the SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative. And many, many companies have made this commitment. And most of the companies cannot be carbon neutral just on their own. They need to offset parts of their emissions because they cannot turn their emissions off to zero. There's a lot of criticism on this offsetting concept, greenwashing, low quality. I accept there's criticism, but I can't accept that we turn the concept down because it's a lovely concept that the companies which emit carbon dioxide pay others to take it back. And this didn't exist 10 to 15 years ago. Now it's like an oasis in the desert of money where money flows into something great, and we should not turn it off. We should just make sure it's getting right. But we were thinking suddenly, if there's so much money for people to bring carbon dioxide back from the air into the ground, can farmers participate in this? Because farmers are growing crops and do carbon sequestration. And that was like a magic moment when people started to think, oh, this is a new business opportunity for farmers. Imagine if a farmer who's doing climate smart agriculture and can prove that he or she's not only growing cereals or corn or whatever, but at the same time reducing greenhouse gases in the air, that this farmer may afterwards sell the cereals, but also the carbon dioxide sequestrated as a credit. So a new business area, a new business opportunity arising just from doing things in a more sustainable fashion. And that was one of the most magic moments when we were thinking about it. There's a second pathway, by the way, of value creation in that space. If you imagine that companies downstream, food value chain downstream, like maybe Walmart or Tesco, if they want to become carbon neutral, then the farmers are their scope 3 supply chain. So they will actually request farmers to produce at lower carbon emission at one point of time because it goes also on their carbon balance. And if we can help farmers to deliver against these expectations, we create value again. So creating value from running a good ecosystem as a farmer can be a sustainable source of value creation in the future if the frameworks are defined, if the measurement is solid and agreed, if the credit system is functional. And this is, I think, where we have to be very mindful not to overdo and not to rush too fast and not to raise expectations too high, because that's always the danger in these type of things, because then you can be very quickly destructive. So this is one example where I think it was really lovely to see how our business and our leadership was turning from concern into excitement quickly.
Great example, and it gives I think these are the kind of stories that is nice to get out there because it adds a bit more practical knowledge on how you can turn these situations around to do good and create value. And as you mentioned, this also requires enablers and support from the surrounding ecosystem and structure. If we think of the new European regulation being, for example, a new structure that is coming in place, or even the investors, like, I mean, there is a number of implications being like investors, how much AUM they want to put behind these kind of projects, customers actually wanting to choose the more sustainable choice, employee preference. If you take all of this current scenario and then we take one step back and we ask you, as we come a bit closer to the end of our episode today, unfortunately, for a bit of an outlook, from a perspective from your side, given your great knowledge on the topic. Once you take all these topics, how do you see the outlook developing for sustainability as a whole or in general?
maybe it's not an outlook. It's a wish. A wish, what I want to express, a couple of wishes. I wish that we come back to a bit more of a convergence of a reporting framework, because the reporting framework is the basis for investees and investors to align on judgments, whether things are green or not green, or investable or not investable under ESG and sustainability considerations. And at the moment, we have a very diverging environment where the Europeans are running very fast, the Americans are more stepping back, and I think that will bring issues for all those who want to create sustainable value, because they are basically trapped between very different jurisdictions. So first wish is come back to more convergence. Please come back to the table, dear politicians. But that's also a call for investors and investees to make that call very loud. Then the next call goes to the investors to say, don't wait for perfect regulations. Go to the companies and say what you want. Express what you want companies to do. I mean, don't sit back and wait. I think engagement is the point. Engage with companies, give them a list of things you want them to change, and then make a subsequent investment and demonstrate to the leaders in these companies that creates value. It's the strongest sign investors can send into the industry which needs transformation is investment. Because that gives you the right to show up at the annual shareholder conference and make a massive speech to the leadership, which you should do. So this is what I hope. And then the call, of course, to the investees is that they don't use things like discussions on scope 3 and all these type of problems which are arising now as an excuse to exit from their commitments. It's a very cheap and weak excuse to say, there's so much problems on scope 3, we don't know how to do it, and there's so much pushback on the political areas on ESG, we are afraid of our reputation, we step back from all these type of things. Don't allow companies to use these cheap excuses. We need to progress on that path. We need to step up on our efforts. Also reduce scope 3 emissions, not only scope 1 and 2. I think this is all I say. Don't allow people to destroy the offsetting concept. Make it good instead, because this is the pathway to bring money to action.
Very powerful last sentence. I think we are just on time with 30 minutes of this interview. I think we could have talked for probably another half an hour. There's a wealth of knowledge in you, and we can really see that you have definitely like an interesting background as well to support that. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So, wir sind jetzt auch schon wieder am Ende des Podcasts angekommen. Ich hoffe, dir hat diese Episode gefallen. Wenn du Hilfe brauchst bei irgendwelchen Kapitalmarktthemen oder digitalen Investor Relations Themen, dann melde dich gerne unter unicornconsulting.com und buch dir einen ersten freien Consulting Call. Wir würden uns ebenfalls darüber freuen, wenn du uns auf Social Media folgst, zum Beispiel YouTube, TikTok, Instagram oder auch LinkedIn, oder wenn du einfach einen Like da lässt. Ich wünsche euch alles Gute und bis zum nächsten Mal. Eure Julia. Ciao.